Can you hear me?
We good? Yeah, I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Super sweet.
All right. So let's see. I can't minimize. Well, let me pull up my questions. So I've sent you the questions already, but
Yeah, I got them right here.
okay. So if you want, you can go ahead and introduce yourself so the class will know who you are. And
Okay, sure. So, hi, my name is Jon Nortill. I am 38. Was born in Lowell, Massachusetts. Grew up, spent most of my life in a town called Pepperell, Massachusetts, where I met Sandy, and went to university. Got a degree in marketing, 4-year school, like you're supposed to do. Went into corporate America, working for primarily travel technology companies. And then around the age of 30, I started to get interested in my Asian culture. And at 32, came to Vietnam for the first time, and just to experience the culture. Went back for a year, returned in 2018, and have been here since, staying in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, Vietnam. So that's a little bit of a quick summary of where I've been.
okay. And so for those that don't know, you were adopted as a baby, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So, yep, I was adopted as an infant. My mother and father are Italian, French, Canadian, American. So my sister was adopted as well, from South Korea. She was born there in Seoul and flew over as a baby. And other interesting caveat of my family is I have actually 5 cousins on both my mother and my father's side that are also adopted. On my mother's side, I have 2 Korean, 1 white, and then on the other side, on my father's side, I have an African American, and then my sister and I. So I lost count. That's either 5 or 6.
Okay, I didn't realize that you had cousins that were adopted as well. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, multicultural as well.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
So what were your experiences growing up, being adopted and being, a member of the Asian culture, but growing up in a predominantly white family?
Community.
Yeah.
Yeah, white family, white community. Sure. So, for me growing up, like, I always knew I was adopted. It's not hard to tell in a multicultural adopted family kind of setting. So my parents were really great and openly communicating that I was adopted, and where, that I was Vietnamese and my sister was Korean. And then as far as my childhood experiences, I feel I was very fortunate because the people around me, Sandy, your brother, your family, everybody in the neighborhood, I never really experienced much racism, especially like what you see today. Growing up in school, I very rarely felt racism. But I also feel it's different because I was raised in a Caucasian American family, whereas somebody who immigrated here would still have the cultural connections. And for many Viet Qs, that's the term when you're Vietnamese, but you're born outside. I speak to a couple Viet Qs, and they often have a lot more traumatic childhoods than I did. and I feel a lot of it's because of just the Asian influence. Like I didn't have any, so I'm kind of like I'm kind of like a banana. I'm yellow on the outside, but white on the inside. So I feel my upbringing was a little bit skewed than your quote unquote typical like immigrated Asian American growing up in America.
Okay. So have you ever
That
experienced like an identity crisis because of that, or?
identity, yes. So that's my identity crisis is looking back and reflecting on the situation and on my life. It happened many times, and I just didn't really know until it hit a tipping point. Um, so I guess it first started out with a health issue.
Okay.
So in 2014, I woke up one morning and I just couldn't move my legs. And so I was living in downtown Boston. So I live super close to some really top hospitals. So I was able to get treated there. So what happened was my potassium dropped super low, and that caused my body to seize. So if you're running and you get a cramp, eat a banana. It's because the potassium will help keep the muscles loose and moving.
Right.
But what I found out is that I have a hereditary autoimmune deficiency called hypokalemic periodic paralysis, which is very rare, predominantly found in Asian men, and is something that is passed down genetically.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I had no idea about this. It was kind of a ticking time bomb. I was super fortunate that it happened in my 30s, as it was at the very end of the spectrum as far as like when it's supposed to hit. So luckily for me, I didn't have to alter my life. What caused it was my thyroid. I also was dealing with Graves' disease at the same time, which is also hereditary to a degree, I believe.
Right.
So that was just a big storm that hit me, all revolving around the fact that I know nothing about my culture, my heritage, my family. So shortly after all of that was taken care of, I sold all my things in Boston, and I moved with my girlfriend at the time to Hawaii. So moving to Hawaii was a culture shock as well, because growing up in New England, it's Irish or like Italian, very Caucasian influenced, but in Hawaii, it's very Asian influenced. So that was kind of my first taste of the Asian culture, which went horribly. It went horrible. I didn't feel accepted. I had a hard time connecting to it because of, just the way I was raised and the way they expected me to behave and understand the cultural nuances.
Right.
So that left a bad taste in my mouth. And when I came back to Boston, I was really turned off by my culture and heritage again, just like in my childhood. But what really kicked me off the next time was a sudden breakup in a relationship, which, so really high level, I got a note saying, "See ya," and all my belongings were like just packed up. So that really brought me to a point where it's like, okay, I'm super triggered. Like,
Right.
what is causing this? This is a pattern through all of my relationships. So I took some time to like deeply reflect. And what I came back with was abandonment.
Okay.
So I am ultra sensitive to abandonment. Like, and even recollect through other past experiences,
Right.
The most vivid traumatic times was about separation, whether it's from my mom or from, ex-girlfriends or partners, whatever. So then I started to research and found that there is a category called adoption trauma. And as I was reading into it, everything I was reading kind of made sense. And the book that really kicked me off and started me down that path was called The Primal Wound.
Okay.
And the author is named Nancy Verrier, Verrier. But it really focuses on the separation between child and mother at
The
birth.
impact that it
The
had
impact,
on-
yeah, and it really goes into the psyche of, a child that didn't have that skin to skin contacting, a child that doesn't have genetic mirroring. So a lot of validation comes naturally when you look at, Phoenix looked at you and she's like, oh, I have my mommy's eyes, my ears, I have her laugh. So growing up not having that is just very confusing.
Yeah.
And then that brings up the identity crisis, because even though like everybody says, oh, you're normal, blah, 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 that validation just was never there. And it's not against my parents back home. I don't think they knew about it. This was during the 80s, so no internet. It was harder to get resources like the internet provides.
Yeah, true. So, with that experience that you went through, what led you to finally decide to go back to Vietnam, back to, your...
Of course. Honestly, discovering adoption trauma. Now there's also a big moment called coming out of the fog, that some adoptees come out of the fog and some like to stay in it, but it's just a moment in time where you really become passionate or curious about your roots, about the blood, about culture, where you came from. And I feel just with my personality and my sometimes my obsession on things, I took it really, really far. So when I first found out about adoption trauma, this was probably 2 weeks of really deep soul searching after that sudden breakup. And I had the cash at the time. And I said, if I don't explore this now, I'm going to keep making these mistakes.
Okay.
And I don't want to even go down that path. So let's have an adventure. I booked a ticket, went through all the hoops to get my tourist visa settled, and I traveled to Vietnam alone for a couple weeks. Not knowing the language, not knowing even how to say hello or thank you or count. I knew nothing. I just knew that there was something in me that was telling me to go there.
What was that experience like when you land there, you're immersed in the culture?
Yeah.
And you have that experience where the people you're looking at look like you.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It's amazing. So when I first landed, the first thing I noticed was the heat, is because I'm super close to the equator, but also just like the smell of everything. Like everything is different from where I grew up. The sounds, the air quality, the pollution, unfortunately, is a lot worse here. But there are so many little things that I start to take in, and it's like I was I was just taking all these little experiences in through a fire hose, and it was just coming and just all over me. And even to this day, so I went from working in corporate to now I'm teaching English at an English center. So rather than talking with people in travel, I'm teaching little 6 to 9, 12-year-olds English. So I find that super gratifying.
Absolutely.
And many of the teachers at the center, they're just so amazed of the energy and the passion and just how I can connect with the children. And I tell them, like, this isn't for them. This is for me. Like, I'm healing when I'm in the classroom with them. I just have to follow a curriculum. But like, I get to see how children interact. I get to see the dynamics, how they share, how they fight, like all the good and the bad, like the things that if I grew up in a Vietnamese household, I would see these kind of engagements, and even just talking with the parents who are able to speak Vietnamese, but like you can see their passion and how much they value their children, which is really heartwarming. But on the other side of things, if you think of adoption trauma, it's also awfully saddening, thinking that, your typical Vietnamese mother and father would hold on to you and cherish you and try to give you the best life with you. Whereas mine wasn't able to do that, and felt that the best way of giving me an opportunity is to leave me.
Yeah. It sounds
so
like
it's kind of like a double-edged sword, but I just love soaking in the culture. Even where I live, I don't want to live near the other expats. If anything, I kind of look down upon them. I want to live with the Vietnamese. I live in a very Vietnamese neighborhood in District 1, so I'm in the heart of the city, but in a very Vietnamese neighborhood. And I've been here for 2 years, and like I go out and I wave to the woman who cooked breakfast across the street. I build like sweet relationships with like the bike men who park the motorbikes, or the servers. And it's kind of, I'm kind of reliving, or I'm trying to live the Vietnamese life that I would envision in my, as a child, so to speak.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And I've followed your journey, just living vicariously through your Facebook posts, and just the first time you went over there, and the videos and the pictures, and
Yeah.
you can just see at first it was just the soul searching, and you can
Mhm.
you can feel it, you know almost like a sigh of relief, I'm home.
Yeah.
It's an
Uh,
to see.
what's that, Sandy? I'm sorry.
It's just an amazing thing to see and be a part, just to witness and to see that happen in your life.
Yeah, and I exactly, and thank you for that. I'm glad my passion and my enthusiasm for being here shows through those posts. But it's so true. Like all my life, I've never really felt like New England was my home. I always had a thought of, I want to go like maybe to the south a little bit more, or maybe out west. But I never knew it was no, no, no. You have to think outside of geopolitical lines. And it's like you want to go truly halfway across the world. It growing up, I did a lot of bouncing around. So after university, I went to Indiana and I came back. Then I went to Boston, came back, Hawaii, came back.
Yeah.
Even studied in Australia and came back. And every time, I kind of like deep inside, I couldn't really verbalize it at such a young age, but it was like, I'm just trying to find a sense of home.
Yeah. Do you feel
And
like you have that now?
once I got into Vietnam, I felt it. And when I returned, I actually approached the adoption agency asking for more records of my adoption. Unfortunately, in Massachusetts, it's a closed adoption system, so all identifying information is redacted.
Okay.
But what I was able to do is find her story. So after my initial trip, I found her story. So she had a family of 5 in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon. When the North came down, she had to flee. And so she had to take the boat out of the
Okay.
city, well, out of the country, uh, where she stayed at a refugee camp in Thailand and then another one in Malaysia before coming to America. Now, unfortunately, she got separated. In, yeah, so this, okay, she got separated from her family, and I was conceived somewhere along the lines. She didn't know, she couldn't recall a name. And when she got to America and had me, she was at the age of 43.
Okay.
Yeah. So knowing that kind of takes this, coming from a rational minded perspective, I guess, uh, it makes sense why in the decision that she made. If you're 43, you don't speak the language, you don't know what's happening to you. Like you don't have the strength of a younger woman to really take on a child. Like what kind of life would I have?
Right.
And it breaks my heart. It really does. But it gives me a lot of pride too. So it's an emotional tug of war um, with adoptees. And I know we're straying more on the adoption side than the Asian American side.
Oh, I
So we
mean,
can,
yeah, no worries. This is definitely, I don't think you're the only one that's experienced this. And so, um,
yeah,
I've never heard this side of your story. And, it's just, it's powerful. And,
it's heavy. It's
it
super
is,
heavy.
it's awesome though, that you've, just your journey
Yeah.
altogether. So what, what advice would you give, to somebody that is trying to better understand your culture or better understand your experience for
Sure. So yeah, so I can touch on the, so like I said before, I'm a banana. So yes, I have an Asian exterior, but my mind, the way it flows, is very in line with where I grew up and the experiences I had in like corporate America. So I'm actually discovering the Asian culture myself in a way.
what
Um,
differences have you seen just from growing up American and being there now, and what have you picked up, especially with the children, that like what are the kind of things that you picked up on that
yeah, gosh, the how family oriented they are. Um, it They are so proud of brothers and sisters and parents that they want to talk about their brothers and sisters so much more than talk about themselves. Like the selfishness is it's there, don't get me wrong, but you see glimpses of like some of my students will come up and it's like, it's my brother's birthday. And I was like, okay, how are you? My brothers woke up so happy today. I was like, okay, how are you? It was like, and later we're going to have a party for my brother. He's starting to, and it's like, they, that that passion, that connection to their blood, like to their bloodlines, is one of the things that I find most powerful. And maybe it's because that's what I'm curious about, that
Right.
I pick on. But you know, you think about Vietnam, it is a poor country. It's developing, but it's still poor. And the average income is about $150 to $400 a month.
Wow.
And the center I work at, it's one of the more reputable ones, I guess, but it's a lot more expensive than, it costs a lot more than what a normal Vietnamese can make. And it's just the sacrifices and the determination to, like, maybe our generation won't be able to make it, but I'm going to sure as shit make sure that this younger generation advances. And I will put all my money, or like I will work, not just mom and dad, the grandparents work. Like they don't stop. Like everything goes towards their kids. Everything goes towards their future. But Vietnam has been in conflict pretty much their entire existence up until 1986, when the U.S. left. Well, Cambodia invaded as well, but yeah, like they've only had peace really since we were kids. So that generation is getting older. The war affected
Right.
generation is, and now this newer generation of people, like we're on the older end of that spectrum. But these children are getting educated heavily, sometimes a little too hard. They get pushed like they do in Japan and China, 6-7 days a week of schooling, like
Oh,
8 or 9 different subjects. I have kids in 6th, 7th grade learning like calculus. You know, like Vietnam is really priming the next wave of students to really help bring the country to the next level. And going into politics really quick, like with the U.S. relation, with international relations with China for manufacturing and goods and everything like that, it's flowing down one country to Vietnam. So Vietnam's really bracing for that economic boom. And then the children here are going to be the ones facilitating that,
yeah.
thus making them, like their parents, really push them hard.
All right. I didn't even
So that's kind of one of the bigger things that I noticed. Like, so it's the love, the bonds, the sacrifices they make, all for the greater good of their families, the country, and things like that.
all right. Man, I really appreciate you taking this time. So my last question
Sure.
will be, so you know that I'm in the clinical mental health program.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as a therapist or a mental health professional,
Yep.
what advice would you give to you know, future therapists that, you know, may come across, you know, John
Oh
in
boy. Well, okay. So I know originally this was like, I can really speak to somebody who's adopted.
Okay.
When it comes to having the Asian, like, again, I don't necessarily connect intellect like with an immigrant, an Asian immigrant. So, but with adoptees, um, it's so it, first off, reading that, or knowing about that book, The Primal Wound. Um, Another really good resource I find is a podcast called Adoptees On,
Okay.
which you can find that on any platform. But essentially, I really like that because the woman, Haley, she interviews other mental health professionals who are also adopted. But with my advice to adopt, to you, if you were to chat with somebody who is adopted, is to know that the likelihood of addiction is super high for them. For us, we're 4 times more likely to commit suicide.
Okay.
That the validation that everybody who knows, fortunate enough to know their birth parents get, that understanding that having no validation is really confusing for us, and that there are a lot of quirks that come up, like perfectionism, hypervigilance, on some sides. Some adoptees might hoard food, thinking that they might be taken away at any time. Um, there are so many landmines, with obviously many problems, but with adoptees, a lot of the landmines that I've found that I have are ones that if you were born into your family, you would take it for granted.
Okay.
Especially around that genetic mirroring. In a multicultural setting with adoption, I feel the genetic mirroring for me was something that I wish I knew about. I wish my sister's Korean, so she kind of looks like me, but honestly, it's not the same. And then, yeah, it's finding out about it and exploring it was kind of life-saving for me. Coming out here, having the balls to just go halfway around the world is pretty
Yeah,
cool in itself.
absolutely.
But when you have such like a strong purpose of being there, and it's not like you're trying to change things, you just need to experience it. So if an adoptee is kind of hesitant or kind of shameful of their culture, I would kind of explore that and
Okay.
understand, like, do you have any exposure, or like, why are you so against it? And for me, I don't know why I was so against it. I guess it's because I felt a Vietnamese gave up on me, so I'm gonna give up on the culture.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there isn't too much. I don't think there is a lot of material for adoption, adoptees. I think there's a lot of content on adoptive parents,
Right.
parents angle of it, and it's not that Cinderella story. You know it,
Even with the best intentions, they're still going,
even
going to,
and I had to have this conversation with my parents when I first started to tell them, like, I think I'm depressed because of the adoption. They took it personal. They're like, wow, I screwed up, you shouldn't have to feel this way, like, we did everything we could. And as my thoughts formed and I was able to communicate this better and consistently with them, and it's not you, it wasn't Ray and Luann, this was just the separation at birth. And so going back to that super quick, with Phoenix, you give birth to Phoenix, you hold her.
yeah.
That's all you do, right?
Yeah.
And just imagine, and at that time, what's happening in your brain, because it
The
isn't formed.
oxytocin. Yeah.
Yeah, you get a shot of the cortisol. I think it's the cortisol.
Oxytocin.
But
Yeah.
I'll stick. Yeah, you say what? Yeah, but you just get a flood of that. So that's how your brain, like your first day, your first 2 days in this world, it's just flooded with. Well, when they separate you. So when you hold it, you get one, but then with fear, another chemical.
The cortisol.
Yeah, the cortisol. So if you think about adoption, like, they're super close and then they separate. And then that cortisol dumps in their brain,
You have
and
this
then
impact.
they're
Yeah.
super vulnerable. So all they can do is wait and wait and wait. And that heartbeat, that smell, that person you took that 9-month journey with, you don't know where they went. So your brain at such a young age, it starts forming differently than if you, like, than say Phoenix, and you were able to bond
Yeah.
and nurture and make sure that you're not going to leave them. And so even though I can't remember it, I feel it. And there are times where I feel this overpowering pulling, and it's around my birthday, it's around my adoption day, it's like around these, and it's every year. And up
Yeah.
until my understanding about adoption trauma, this would drive me to a deep, dark hole. And then my parents had no idea. They're like, why are you so grumpy on your birthday? And then I would feel bad that I feel sad. And now I feel even worse because I'm supposed to make my parents feel happy. I should be happy on this moment. But some uncontrollable thing is just bringing me down to like the depths, like super, super deep. So if you take that kind of thought, and for somebody who's older, maybe they have a drug problem. Again, like adoptees are highly addictive personality people. On top of that really deep annual depression with like
Yeah.
if it's adoption trauma, it really makes sense why adoptees are like 4 times more likely to commit suicide, because there are questions that are burning in the depths of their souls that they don't know what it is. They can't put words around it because that trauma, if they're like me, it happened before you were before you could
Even,
speak, before your
yeah.
memories could form. So it's just this utter like pulling.
Yeah.
So that would be some kind of my advice for if you were to chat with me. I would like for you to know about those kind of traps, not traps, but those triggers, because that was the hardest part for me to get my brain around, and that took me 30 some odd years to be like, aha.
Yeah. Not everybody can realize that and come to that conclusion like you have, and
Agreed.
have that
Agreed.
awareness. That's, I know that probably took a lot of work to get to that point, and I'm really proud of you. That's really awesome.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and like it's everybody has struggles in life, and fortunately, up until the adoption stuff, this is my biggest struggle. But when you meet that, something in me was just like, if you don't take care of this, this could develop into something much worse. Or if I keep making these mistakes, I'm going to make it again, and maybe 10 years goes by before I revisit this place and I am able to like really analyze it and tackle it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm single, no children, no wife. It was a perfect time for me to kind of take this time for myself. So I'm just super happy I did.
I am too.
And yeah. So yeah, it's good. It's good. I feel the energy I have here hasn't been nearly like it was back home. And I do see myself uh, staying here for a long time. So
All right. I
yeah.
appreciate you you taking the time and doing this interview with me, even though we do have that 12-hour time difference. And
My day is just starting. Yours is
I,
just ending. So
exactly. But I appreciate you taking the
perfect.
time out of your day to talk with me and to allow me the privilege to, for my class to, learn a little bit about your experience too.
Yeah. I'm more than happy to help. Yeah, I'm interested to hear what your class's thoughts are on like adoption. Like, are there any things that they didn't really like, topics I bring up that they weren't aware of, or if they have
Absolutely.
follow-up questions? Yeah, I'm more than happy to chat. Like, this is a topic I've become very, very passionate about, and I try to be very transparent on my vulnerability and the weaknesses that I've found in myself, looking at adoption as a traumatic experience. So.
All right. Thank you again. Thank you for being vulnerable with me in my class.
Yeah, no problem. It's the way I like to start my mornings.
All right.
All right, Sandy. Well, yeah, I'm so glad we're able to chat. Again, I'm super proud of you and everything you're doing.
Thanks.
Yeah, I live vicariously through you. You live vicariously through me. We know each other's life stories and both of our trials and tribulations. So, yeah, it's really, really great to see what you're doing. So keep it up. I think you're going to help impact a lot of people, and your open-mindedness is exactly what the world needs. And I'm sure your class is just like you, and you need to be more open-minded, especially in times like this.
All right. I appreciate it. I'll let you know if there's any follow-up questions.
Yeah, I'm around.
All right. Bye.
See you. Bye.